The Medicine Hat and District Germans from Russia Society is committed to recording first-person accounts of the immigrant history of Germans from Russia and Eastern Europe. Today, January 21st, 2017, our interview is with Otto Gross, an immigrant from Bessarabia. Mr. Gross is a charter member of our society and a knowledgeable student of the social history of his family in Bessarabia. My name is Ted Brim, and I am pleased that Otto has agreed to grant this interview. Thanks, Otto. I understand that you were born in a village area in Bessarabia. Could you describe that a little bit?
Bessarabia, Romania at that time. Yeah. And the village was Kuln, K-U-L-N.
Mm-hmm. Kuln.
Yeah. I was born there in September 1932. I was the second child of my parents, Otto and Pauline Gross.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like in that area? Was it a farm village where people farmed outside the village?
Yeah, I would say over 90%. They were all farmers.
Mm-hmm.
There were some blacksmiths, some carpenters, but not too many industries whatsoever.
What brought the Germans into that area, which was Bessarabia originally?
Well, originally Bessarabia was taken away from Turkey by the Russian Tsar in 1812. Then in 1814, he opened that country up for homesteading. And he called mainly German settlers out. He wanted German settlers from Germany, Poland, and Eastern Europe, more or less.
Yeah.
And they homesteaded them with 60 hectares, which is close to equivalent of a quarter section of land here, and per family.
Mm-hmm.
And they were promised all the freedoms, religious, school freedom, every freedom you could think of. And that held on until 1876. There was a war, I believe, Russia and Japan. And then that was taken away from them. They had to go and serve the army. They had to drop their German schooling, and only Russian was imposed upon them. And they gave them 2 years' time to bow under the new rules and regulations or leave the country.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them packed up and left the country. Some to Brazil, some to Argentina, America, Canada.
But your family stayed.
Our family stayed, yeah.
Your people stayed then until the Second World War.
Till 1940.
Yeah.
Russia gave Romania, we were part of Romania since 1918. When the revolution started in Russia, a German delegation from the south and Moldovan delegation from the north went together and requested the Romanian government to come in and occupy Bessarabia, which happened then in 1918, just at the peak of the revolution. So Bessarabia more or less got sheltered for the revolution then. I've had 2 uncles serving in the Russian army as miners even, because my grandfather was mayor of the city, of the village of Kuln at that time. And he got the orders, how many horses to ship to the army, how many wagons and how many men.
Yeah.
And so he sent his 2 minor sons to the army for the people to keep their mouth shut.
Between 1918 up until the Second World War.
1914
Yeah.
to 18.
To 18.
Yeah.
But then going forward between 1918 and the war years, the Second World War years, what was going on then? How were people?
Well, they became part of Romania then.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to serve under Romania then.
And what were the economic conditions at that time for farm people?
Well, Bessarabia was known as the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. So the majority were farmers. There was very little industry there. Some villages had a few more, but mostly it was just little businesses that started up in. So it was all farming. So they were depending totally on farming.
The German people in Bessarabia, Romania, whichever time it was, were in the minority. How were they treated by the officials and people generally? How did they get along? And
Well, in generally, there were not just Germans there were Russians, Romanians, Bulgarians. The Otto family stayed there. A lot of Jews. In general, they got along amongst each other, just like brothers and sisters. There was no difference. When you got to the market, they spoke either Romanian or Russian language. Most of the people spoke 3 languages. And they got along real fine.
And how did they get along though with the families amongst themselves? I mean, the officials treated you okay during that period.
Well, there were rules and regulations come in, and they were quite strict from the Romanian government. They want to Romanianize all the Germans.
Oh,
They only have Romanian schooling, Romanian lessons and everything. And thanks to a pastor Haas at that time, he was the head pastor of the Lutheran church in Bessarabia. And he fought tooth and nails for the Germans to maintain their German language and maintain their German schooling, their German teaching in churches and everything. And it did cost them extra taxes, but they were able to survive on it.
and of course, then going forward again, the people stayed there until the war years. And what do you recall of the war years, Second World War?
Well, I recall in June 1940, my dad was in the Romanian army. We didn't know where or what. He served 3.5 years in the Romanian army. But Russia in June, they gave Romania 3 days time to clear out. And they came in June. The Russians and the Romanians were no match for them. They were still pulling their cannons with horses in. The Russians came in with tanks and big vehicles and what have you, heavy equipment. So they cleared Bessarabia in 3 days' time.
And was there an agreement, it seems to me from my knowledge of history, there was an agreement between the German and the Russian government about how the German exodus would be treated, the German people would be treated. Do you recall?
Yeah, well, I was 8 years old at that time, and I recall there was agreement made between, I believe it was Molotov and Ribbentrop about the German people in Bessarabia. And that they could immigrate back to Germany again. And at the beginning there were very few of them that really wanted to go. They said, "Hey, we lived on the Russia before, we homesteaded here on the Russia. Why shouldn't we be able to live on the Russia again?" So that went on for a while, and then all at once, as I recall, was the richest people in some of the villages were picked up and put into labor camps. The Russians picked them up. After 2 weeks, they let them go again. Some of them didn't make it. And the ones that made it, they said, "People, pack up and get out. This is not Russia what we know anymore." And that was to encourage them to immigrate to Germany.
So when your people and others, of course, you weren't only your family, all the Germans basically were leaving at about the same time. Can you describe some of the preparations they had to make, if you remember?
Well,
You had 3 days, I guess.
No, we had longer than that. It went on, it started right away with the Russian occupied Bessarabia in June 1940. And in July it started already the negotiation about taking the German, or the German all out of there, back to Germany. And they knew, but all they were allowed to take with them was 50 kilograms of personal belongings. The rest of all had to stay. And the women and children were taken out of there. We left September 28, 1940, by trucks and buses. The men and the boys 15 years and older, they left October 15th in our village. Other villages they left sooner, some of them a bit later, with the horses and wagons. And they had the belongings with them then.
Can you describe some of the feelings at that time? Because obviously this was home for the people from 1814 to 1940, that was home. What were the feelings like? Do you remember any of that when people had to move on?
Well, I can tell you my personal feeling. I was 8 years old and I was happy. I never had a ride with a truck or a car or anything in my life. I was always, now you get a chance to take a vehicle ride. Well, I was happy and jumping around and running around the truck that we were hauled out with till the big bang rang the first gong. And I was down on the ground. And I grabbed onto the grass and I hung on to it and says, I'm not leaving. Mm-hmm. Do what you want. And then I remember 2 German soldiers packed me and threw me up on the truck. I don't know who held me or what. I don't know nothing until we got on the boat in Gallows.
So the people really had no choice. It was,
no.
You had to go.
No. Well, there were about 97,000 that left.
So that trek into what was then Germany, probably into East Germany was the intent. Did the people have any idea where they were going?
No.
They had none?
No. So they were put into camps in Germany, and we were in 2 places. The one was in Miltenberg, and they emptied a big high school there for the Germans to stay there. And then just before Christmas, we were transferred to Wernick, which is near Würzburg or south of Hanover. And that's where we met our dad again. He was in the Romanian army from 1938 until, July 38 until 1940 in December. We didn't know a thing about him whatsoever, where he was or what.
Where was the front at that time? I mean,
well, there was no front at that time. Poland was occupied. Yugoslavia was occupied. Hungary joined the Germans. Mm-hmm. Romania were with the Germans. Mm-hmm. So there were no fighting going on.
No shots over your head.
Not with the Russians. No, they were actually, they signed the non-aggression pact, what they called it, agreement, that nobody would attack each other.
And on that trip that people made, you said some of them went by train, some by wagon, some probably had to walk too. Can you?
No, they were all, like I said, the women and children were taken out with trucks and buses. The men and the boys with 15 years and older, and the men, they came with the team of horses then. But 2 weeks later, approximately. But the team of horses and the wagons were taken over by the Russians in Galats, which is Romania, where the Donau runs into the Black Sea.
Mm-hmm. Was there any leadership on that when they were on that trek, or were you just everybody for himself?
No, you've had, there was a fellow by the name Broneski. And he was more or less the head leader of the Bessarabian German peoples. And he did the head negotiating and things like that, you know.
So when you went by train and whatnot, where would the connection made? You said you were on a boat for a while too.
Well, we went up the Danube River
Oh, I see.
from Galați, Romania, to Prahova, Yugoslavia. Now, how long that trip took, I don't know, because I don't remember a thing from that trip.
Yeah.
And I came to again just before we got taken off the boat.
From what your parents and others said, how were you treated in those other countries that you went through, or was there any?
Well, there were no contacts. You were out on the Danube River on the water
And that was
we
it.
got off, yeah. And in Yugoslavia again, in Prahova, there were no contact with the civilian except some Germans that lived in Yugoslavia, in the area. They came in and done some visiting, and they brought food and stuff in there. But otherwise, no, it was all guarded up by the German army.
So you were under the supervision of the
German army, yeah.
at that time. How did they treat you?
Well, they were treated well.
What were some of the hardships that you remember on that trip, if any, or any of the stories that your parents or somebody told about on the way?
Well, what should I say, hardships? Like I said, the hardest thing for me was when we had to leave.
That's it. Yeah.
That was, I'll never forget that in my life. The first gong of that big bell, that's still in my ears today.
So you had a lot of, I'm sure you had a lot of other memories as we went further along, but were there any problems with identification or anything like that? You had to have passports and all the documents, or a lot of people, when you read about some of those things, that was one problem that people had sometimes. But you probably were under the supervision of the German army, so.
Yeah, not that I know of. Yes, after the war there was lots of problems. But until that time, not that I know of any problems or anything.
So where were your people resettled then? And the majority of the Germans from Bessarabia, where were they settled?
Well, the most of them were resettled what they called it the Wartikau.
Yeah.
Which is now Poland again, and then it was Germany and Poland back and forth. And most of them were resettled there. And we were put in. The Polish people were taken out, and some people that got in, that the beds were still warm when they got put in.
So there must be some stories on the other side of that movement, eh?
Yeah.
That we wouldn't want to hear either.
Some people, some of our Bessarabian people couldn't take it. They ended their lives. They just couldn't.
They wouldn't do that.
Well, they couldn't take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was some of the condition of the resettlement. What was it like then when you got into those places? It was probably farmland, right?
Yeah.
And did when you moved in, or you or other families moved in, did they start farming the land right away?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. You had to take it over just like that.
Like
this is your own. It's not all of it. The rest of it you get after the war. Some people got more, some depending, you know. But I know my dad got only about half of what he did had there, and he says, well, when the war is over, you get the rest of it. Well, yeah, we did.
Yeah. How did the local people react? Like the Polish people, obviously.
And generally, I got to say the older ones that were up in the 50s and older, most of them spoke good German. They had all German schooling and stuff, you know. And And the average, we were trained not to get along with them as kids already. And on the average, they got along good.
Kids always manage to get along somehow.
Somehow, yeah. But even the population as a whole, because the farmers that were on those places where the Bessarabian people was put in back into their places, they were most of them shipped to Germany for workers or factories or what have you.
So they were displaced to another
They were displaced to another place. They were not there.
What did people do then? You were there for how long in that particular settlement?
Well, from 41 in March till January the 20th, 45.
But then during that period there must have been some action on the war front. Or was there any back and forth between?
Well, put it this way, most of the Bessarabians that were 18 years and older, unless they were up in the high age already, they got called into the army.
Again, no choice. Eh?
No choice. And over 10% of them got killed. And I always said they needed the Bessarabian people because anything over 20 years old, or the middle of 20s and up, they spoke 3 languages. They spoke Russian, Romanian, and German.
So they were an advantage too.
They were an advantage for the German army, yeah.
So how did the people survive then? Did they survive just pretty well on agriculture? Did some of them drift into other occupations? Or?
Well, some of them that I know of from our village that had trades, like the furniture makers, blacksmith. They got the Polish people that were furniture makers, had their business, they were taken out, they were turned over to the Germans, to the Bessarabian Germans. Blacksmith, I know a fellow particularly here, he passed away in Edmonton, he ended up in Edmonton after the war, and he was a blacksmith. And he got a blacksmith again in Wartegau, near Posen there.
The Wartegau district that you were talking about, was that a district set aside or was for the people that they brought out of the eastern area into that area, or was it a district beforehand? Was it a special setup or?
No, I would almost, really thinking back, and I was doing a lot of thinking on that, the Bessarabian people were spread all over the Wartegau. Some of them ended up in Gdansk, some of them stayed in Germany. And when I really got back to it and put more thought into it, that I kind of suspect that the German peoples were resettled on farms that were before Napoleon, under East Prussia at that time, that they were German names on those farms. Possibly the same names that were put back on again. Because we were spread all over. And I got that one when I found out where the Gross family originated from. And they came from Góra, Poland, which is southwest of Posen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I kind of thought, well, gee, we were only that far away.
From your original?
From the original. Mm-hmm. So, was there a name Gross on that farm that we were put on? Or wasn't there? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And other ones were settled in different counties, different areas. Some of them got settled near Gdansk. Some of them which is now, it was East Prussia at that time. Now it's Russia. Some of them were settled there.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of would take it that I might not be too far wrong that the German peoples were resettled on farms that were in German names or the same family names before Napoleon's time.
And in that period that you were there, in the Botagao, there were all kinds of people from South Russia there too at that, because they came out in 41.
They came out in 43, the first one showed up. And that's where they called them the Volga Germans. They were mainly Mennonites.
And weren't there any from Besser, I don't know, from Odessa region, the south part?
Not that really. I can't say. There might have been.
Yeah.
There might not. I don't know.
Yeah. But there were other Germans that came in during that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 1945 or thereabouts, again on the move. Why were your people moved, and what was behind that?
Well, we had no choice again, and really, I think I talked to you on that too. That a friend of mine, his dad, and a Polish friend of his, they had a ham radio, and they were listening to the Russian for newscast, which was totally, there was a death penalty on it if it got out, you know. But they did, and the Russians forecasted that the Germans should move the women and children in safety from here to here, and then from here to here, that there's not going to be a big chaos started up. And a friend of mine was named Otto Bender. He came and told me that 2 weeks before we had to leave. He says, Otto, tell your mom, it's just in 2 weeks we got to leave. I says, you got to be kidding. No, he says. The week after, he came again, he says, tell your mom, next Saturday we got to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So then I told my mom, and she just went beat me up.
Mm.
He says, there's no way, you know. I says, okay. So as things went, and that's a sad thing too again, you know. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the mayor came around. He says, Mrs. Gross, you have to deliver so many bushels of rye Monday. You've got 40 market hocks in the barn. They got to be all shipped. And my mom said, well, this was January the 20th, 1945. He says, you know, he says, our hired people, they got the day off today. We had 2 men working for us and two girls. And he says, it doesn't matter. He says, you got to trash that rye Monday morning. You got to deliver so many bushels and so many hocks that got to be delivered. And you better get your people back. So one of the girls knew where the boys were. The one was a man with a family, 3 kids. He was home with his family. And the other boy was his friends. He was the younger boy. So she went and got him. And I was chasing the horses. It was more or less what you go, a merry-go-round, power takeoff going up to the thrashing machine. All day I was chasing those horses. They were just sweating the foam. And they just made sure to get them on the ride. So at 5 o'clock he came, Mrs. Gross, packed just the necessary things. We got to go for it. That's just an exercise in case we have to flee. Because the Russians are coming closer, and we only can go to the next station, railroad station, which was about 8 kilometers away, 8 or 10 kilometers, something like that. And just for exercise, then we come back again. That was at 5 o'clock, and just at 8 o'clock you got to be at the church. 3 hours time. My mom just went crazy. My dad was called in the army. Because he opened up his mouth a bit too far against the system, he was gone. And yeah, she just packed quickly. And we were 9 wagons and team of horses that left the village. So, like I said, when we got to the next village, which is 2 kilometers away, the next one was 5 kilometers away, but we got to the second one, we were only 2 wagons together. I was the oldest one in my family on the men's side, and then an old man with his family and his daughter-in-law and 9 kids. He was 75 years old. The rest of the men were all in the army. And so we stuck together.
And where did you cross then into what was then West Germany?
Well, we crossed into Neusalz on the Oder. That's where we crossed the Oder River, which is now the border between Poland and Germany. Where the real old border was between Germany and Poland at that time, I couldn't tell you.
Oh.
I do believe it was the Warta. It's a big river, which Wartegau was named after. You know. And but we crossed Neusalz on the Oder. And we stayed then, because my youngest brother was only 2 weeks old when we left. And he had a kind of an infection on his head. His head was all one big scars. So we had to stay. And we did find a house, we just got across the river, the bridge in the Oder River. And we found a house that was empty. So we were able to stay there for about a week till he got cleared up a bit. And then we left again from there.
Was your family was probably, from what you've heard from other people from Bessarabia, was probably pretty typical. They all had to make about the same movement?
Yeah. I would say that's right across about the same as the Jewish and almost. Some of them worse, some of them a bit less worse, you know. But on the average, that was about it. But anyway, when we left there again, we ended up in Cottbus, and I remember one thing that Hermann Goering used to say: if one enemy of ours steps on German ground, my name will be Meyer, not Goering anymore. I still remember in Cottbus when we got in, there was a big round cement place there, and it was written all around it, now your name is Hermann Meyer. I had to true that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah. So when you got into that area, then what happened? Now we're talking...
Well, we got into that area, and then the order was hit for Berlin. Cottbus southeast of Berlin. No, approximately, I would say 100-some kilometers. Anyway, we left, and then just before Berlin, approximately 35 kilometers. We came out of the city, and then we drove into a village, and we got attacked by American airplanes that came diving down. They would shoot at anything. And so we were able to we were close to a big building, and there was a big linden trees. So we were able to get in underneath that, and they just took off. And as we got underneath that, who came around the other corner? A cousin of mine and my mom's youngest sister. They just about drove together with the horses yet. They were trying to get underneath there too. And so then my dad's oldest brother, he was there, and he went to the mayor and he says, well, you know, these people don't move anymore. And the mayor kind of said, he says, you know, he says, we got enough here of that gypsy folks here. We don't need any more. After Berlin, I don't want to see any around. And he's just kind of grabbed him by the neck, and he says, well, say that gypsy word once more, and I'll let you have it. So he backed off. And then he said, you know, there and there's houses. They got lots of room, they got nobody in there, there's only 2 people living there. Yeah, I'll make room. So, then we got a little room in there. We were 7 kids at that time. And it wasn't probably, I would say, from the back of your chair, like that, and maybe the length of this whole room. That's where we lived.
How long was that?
Until, I think it was until May 1945, shortly after the war was over. And then really relatives were trying to find each other, and then we found the next village away, approximately about 7 kilometers away, where my mom's 2 of her sisters were, and 2 of her sister-in-laws. They had found each other together already. And then some other people from our village, from Kuln, Arabia, they had grouped together, so we moved there then. And then we had the reasonably good living quarters.
And what were your people doing then? What was your family doing then? Farming?
Well, no, we just helped the farmers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Helped
you
wherever possibly.
so you weren't tied to the land. You were
Well, we had nothing.
Nothing.
before.
Yeah,
We
nothing,
had
yeah.
nothing. Just what you could put a little buns underneath your arm and walk, that was it. You know. And then we stayed there, and then my mom's oldest brother, he came over. He was released from the English war prison. He came over to get his family. So he came one morning early, and I had lower body typhus at that time. And I was that far. Anyway, he came in and he says, Otto, I don't think we'll see each other again. And then he went to his family, and next morning they left before daybreak. At 8 o'clock the Russians were coming and looking for him, but he was gone.
Hmm.
Anybody that the Western Allies released from war prison came over into the Russian zone. A good portion of them got captured and put back to Siberia.
That's another story.
That's another story.
That's a long one.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were
But
there.
anyway, and then shortly after that, we got a letter from our dad, and he was in southern Germany. He was a war prisoner in American, an American war prisoner, for only 2 weeks, and then he got released because he was a self-employed farmer, and they were looking for someone. He applied for it. He got the position to look after a farm for 2 elderly people there.
So you moved there.
No, we moved in 18th of December. We uncles of mine and some other men from our village from Arabia, they went and rented some freight cars, rail freight cars, and we were supposed to be shipped as freight to Hamburg. When we got just before what they called it, the zone borders between the Allies and the Russian zone, occupied zone in Germany, the Russians stopped that train, opened every boxcar up, and there were all people in there. So we all got taken out of there, and we had to go through a registration. And so we stayed about 4 days there, and till we got the registration through and everything, you know. And my grandmother from my mom's side, she needed help, and an uncle of mine, he needed help. And then the English Army Red Cross or ambulances came over and picked up the people that needed help. And for every 2 people they had to take one healthy one along to help them over in the west side. So they took my sister along, the oldest sister, and the youngest sister, she was a twin. Her brother just passed away before we left. And so I said to her all the time, I says, Lily, I says, we're going to Daddy now. He says, no, I'm not going to Daddy, I'm going to Willie to play with the angels. That was her thing. So they got picked up 2 days before we were able to get through. We got through then on the 18th of December at 4:30. At 5 o'clock the Russians closed the border. We just walked across.
So now you're...
Then we were in it, which was called Friedland on the Line. It's still a camp, refugee camp today.
Yeah.
It's still operating today as a refugee camp.
Yeah, a lot of people I've talked to talk about that
Yeah.
particular camp.
And when we came across, well, my sister had passed away. So we buried her, and then we were shipped out to direction Hamburg, north of Hamburg. It's a whole area. And we stayed there over Christmas, and then in March our dad was able to find us and came up to pick us up and took us to southern Germany, to the place where he had managed the farm.
So how did when you got then into Germany proper, at least to the western side, how were you treated by the German population? Sometimes I've read some history that one didn't treat the other too well.
In general, it was not too bad. But there were the odd cases that I don't want to think about that went on. So, they were not treated as human beings. They were just...
So you were now, let's use the word free. And what did you do then until, or before your move to Canada?
Well, I finished grade 8, and I got to go back there. All my schooling in my life was grade 1 complete. Between grade 1 and grade 8, the longest I had 3 months schooling in grade 8 at the end of that school year. Then in 1946, I was 13.5 years old. I had to earn my own living. So I started apprenticing as a cooper, bear maker. And that's my real trade, is cooper.
Yeah. They don't make many of those anymore around
No, no.
Anyway, so let's go to the point where you made the choice to come to Canada. What was behind that? Did you have to move, or?
No, we didn't have to move. That was a choice that my parents made. And the kids had no say in it, because unless you're 21 and older, then you had until up to that. He didn't. But anyway, it was, Dad always wanted to go farming again. And he tried his best to the farm that he was managing became available to be rented again. But just somehow the mayor was one of them that sure didn't have no mercy for refugees. If he could do anything against them, he would do it. There was no choice that he had. So our parents did try to immigrate to America for 3 years. Didn't happen. Then there came the choice to come to Canada as sugar beet workers. Then my parents said, we'll take that. Because there was no hope of being... Actually, thing was pretty rough in Germany, economic and everything, and work and everything was bombed out the cities, and living conditions were not all that nice. So they decided to come to Canada.
So when you got here, you were with the family still, and where did you move to?
Well, we landed in Raymond. East of Raymond, between Raymond and Sterling, out in the countryside on a farm for sugar beet workers. And I'll never forget that too, when the farmer came and picked us up at the railroad station in Lethbridge. And then we were halfway to the farm, to Raymond. And our mom said, he just cried out loud, he says, "Children, now we're gonna have a heimat again, a home again."
And the word Heimat means something,
Heimat means something,
to German from that area anyway.
Yeah.
So when obviously your mother had that reaction, what was your reaction to the land when you got here?
Well,
Or to the country, I guess.
I kind of liked it. But the first 2 years you couldn't speak the language, you couldn't communicate unless you found someone that spoke German. And it was pretty hard. If there would have been a way to walk back, and it's not only me, I talked to many of them, if they could have walked back the first 2 years, they would have. But then after 2 years, you got to know the language, you got to start getting jobs here and there, and you've seen a different future, a picture turned around that looked promising.
How did the people treat you generally, other than the fact that you couldn't speak the language? But I mean, how were you treated by Canadians?
Actually pretty good. With the exception of some relatives.
Isn't it,
One.
isn't it always that way? Anyway.
But in general, we were treated very good.
How were you treated by government and officialdom? You know, how did that go? I mean, were you inundated with paper and being checked out every once in a while? Or?
Well, not once we were here. That was all done in Bremen before we went on the ship, before we landed. Us left Germany for Canada as an immigrant. We were put through the mills there. And which was rightfully so, you know. Looking back today, well, are they still doing it today? I don't think so.
So your early life in Canada again was agriculture, right?
Yeah.
And you stayed in that.
Yeah. Well, I worked 5 seasons on the CPR railroad in the summer. In the winter I was helping farmers here and there with feedlots and a bit. And then slowly we started out on our own.
Yeah. During that time, once you were a little bit established, did you ever really miss Bessarabia?
Bessarabia, I got to be honest, I still miss it today.
You've been back?
I've been back 4 times there. I wouldn't want to live there again. But in the heart, it's still your birthplace and it's still your home. It will be.
It's Heimat.
It's Heimat, yeah.
So when you got established, of course you established your own family. Had you gotten a farm by then, or?
Yeah, I had, well, with my dad together, we had bought in '58 already a half section in southeast of Ireland. Just a bare land, and then we started to build up and we worked together for 5 years, and then in '63, '64 we split up. I went on my own.
So you got over to Canada, was it 52?
53.
53.
Yeah, we landed in Lethbridge on March the 28th.
So
53.
Your family did quite well to have bought some land after about 4 or 5 years here, eh?
Yeah. Well, we rented some. We worked 3 years for the same farmer in the sugar beets, near halfway between Sterling and Raymond. And then in 55, in 57, we rented some land for growing sugar beets from farmers. Dad rented first, and we worked together, and then the year after, farmer came along and says, "Otto, you wouldn't want to rent 20 acres of sugar beets of mine?" I says, "Yeah." So, and he was pretty good. Everybody warned me for that fellow, he says. And we just made an agreement, shook a hand on it, and that was it. And I never had the contract. He had the contract. We kept the beets delivery tickets separate, and he paid me. And when that got out, oh, the whole village in Stirling said, "You've got to be nuts. Trusting that man, I wouldn't trust him nowhere." I says, "You know what?" He says, "Farrell's been the best man to me." He says, every time when he picked up the check in the post, in the mail, in the post office, he came to my place to make sure, settled down and paid me my share, and that was it.
So you've been a successful farmer. Obviously, you were elected to the county council for how many years?
14.
14 years. And
I was also on the irrigation board for 12 years.
so you've fit into Canada quite well and been successful and made contribution.
Yeah.
One of the things that I did want to ask you about is, you've mentioned Bessarabia and your feelings. What about the traditions from there? Did you bring any of the traditions, and what have you maintained? You obviously kept your language. You can still speak the German dialect of your own.
I still speak the German. I still speak the dialect of Kashups.
Yeah.
and the Schwäbisch.
Yeah.
I do that too, but Kashups is my mother tongue.
Yeah. Do you have any holidays or festivals that are special to you as a result of what was in Bessarabia?
No, we more or less had the same holidays when it comes to the Christian holidays. Other than national holidays, each country is different.
Yeah, yeah. But you didn't have any special?
No.
And food, you said before, was very important in the kitchen. The kitchen, you kept all the traditions.
Yeah.
What about celebration? Do your people have any costumes or anything like that? Any special festivals that are?
Well, the Bessarabian people as groups, yes, they had girls and they had their special customs on the Easter or and the holidays, and the boys, they had their own uniform, stuff like that,
But you didn't bring any of that over here? No. What about songs and poetry and that kind of thing? Did you?
That one, yes, we did.
You brought some?
Yeah. Don't ask me which one. The wife knows more than I do.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add? That I might have missed asking you, or?
Well, I would say, gotta go back to my own family, and we had, my wife comes originally from the Gdansk area, and we got to know each other here in 57 when she came over, and then 59 we got married. We had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, and offspring's now 20 grandchildren.
Wow.
But no great-grandchildren yet. And they're all self-employed. They all got their own little businesses, and the 2 oldest boys are farming. The second oldest one took over a farm that I established here in Bow Island, and the oldest one, he moved up to Fort Vermilion.
You mentioned
farming up there.
You mentioned your wife is from Gdansk.
Yeah.
Was her story similar to yours?
The refugee side of it, yeah. Actually, probably somewhat worse yet than mine. Because they stayed there and they got run over by the Russian army. And they were almost a year there yet. And she doesn't really, well, she was 6 years old then.
Mm.
No, not even. She was born 38 and that was in 45, 7.
Yeah.
But 7 years old. And they came out of there in 46. They were deported then with open train cars back to Germany.
Well, Otto, I really appreciate the fact that you gave us this interview. We are very pleased with it, and I'm sure that it will be important to somebody in the future when they're looking at what was that like for people. And I think that your story is fairly typical of the Bessarabians and not too different from others that came over as refugees after the war.
No, I would say not at all. They're all similar, and like I said at the beginning there, some of them are worse, some of them are less worse. But on the typical side of it, it's just pretty well went through all the same situation on the average, you know.
Thank you very much.
And I know the ones that came to Canada there, some of them went back, but the ones that stayed here, I think they were a great contributor to the economical side of it to this country.
We know that, yeah.
You know.
Thank you.